Waheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Waheguru Ji Ki Fateh. Welcome to another edition of the Sikh Channel Business Program. Today I'm joined by Amit Puri. Amit is a senior tax advisor. Let's meet Amit and find out more about his work. Amit, welcome to the Sikh Channel.
Thank you very much.
Can you tell us briefly about yourself? Where are you from? Where were you born? And where do you live?
So, I mean, like I suppose many of your viewers and listeners today, I'm born in the country here. So I'm UK born and bred, but my parents both are from India. My father was from Phagwara, came here when he got married at about 20. My mother came here when she was very young, about 4 years old, but she's also from Punjab. Spent most of my childhood going back every year, for a good 20 years, I suppose. And now I tend to go back with my family a bit less, but I do quite a few business trips there now, so the dynamic's changed.
Have you kept a connection to the Punjab in terms of going back, taking your children back to the Punjab?
I do. I think it's quite important that you do that, because if you don't, your kids will just never recognise what India is. I must say I haven't taken them too many times. They're still quite young, but whenever I get a chance to go back, my family are now based in Chandigarh there, but we have family in Florida and Amritsar, so we go there. I make sure I always get a trip into Shimla there, because it's quite close by as well.
Great. That's super. And you always take time to go to Harmandir Sahib, to the Golden Temple?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. It's a tremendous place for people to see. I think it's nice to when you go there, you see people that are not only from the UK and India, but you've got people from around the world visiting there.
Absolutely.
It's a site to go to.
Can you tell us about your job, what you do? You work for Lancaster Knox, a specialist tax advisory service. This sounds very complex.
It's not too complex, Devinder. I think what it is, there will be lots of accountants that are drifted into tax over their lifetime, but they tend to be those clever people that come up with bespoke planning for people to achieve their financial and business goals. My path has been different. So I started off with HMRC, Inland Revenue, in 2004 as a trainee tax inspector. I became a senior inspector in 2007. I spent about 11 years at HMRC investigating people and businesses, and certainly not one of those people that family want to talk to at weddings and parties, but yes. I think that helps you appreciate risks and how people can have problems. But then I left, and I've been on in the private sector now for 3 and a bit years, and I help people that are under inquiry or investigation so they can understand what could have gone wrong and how to fix it. And in doing so, you just help people get over the problem and get on with their lives and grow the businesses.
So you've gone from gamekeeper to poacher, is that right?
Absolutely. I think I wear that badge loud and proud.
And what's the difference between working in the public sector for the HMRC, a big institution, part of the civil service and the government, and working for a private organisation? What's the cultural differences?
It differs, Devinder. I think I would say about 7-8 years of my life at HMRC, I had about 4 different jobs, tended to be local offices where inquiries and investigations were carried out into localised people. I think there you have a lot more control over your time. It's what people recognise as public sector working. You have a lot of control, good work-life balance. But then towards the end of my career at HMRC, it was a much more corporate world, and I did a 1.5 years in Whitehall, Parliament Street. So looking at strategy, working with ministers to basically bring in new stuff to deal with old problems. I think that world is very different. It's very corporate, much longer hours. You forget you're working in a public sector environment. So it feels like you're in the private sector by then.
Most people resent paying tax or don't like to pay tax, but it's very important that we all pay our taxes so the country can run and the services we enjoy can operate. And what would you like to say about that, when there's always an aversion, or people always want to try and get away from paying the tax man?
I think what you just mentioned there, that's something that is drummed into you as a trainee inspector quite early on, because you have to understand why you do your job. I think we all enjoy our roads. Look, they're far better than other countries or some rural areas. We have good schools that are put out. It's not necessary everybody needs to go to a private school. We're not in a country where everybody has to pay for their schooling. We have use of hospitals and all the public sector amenities. We have like good firefighting facilities, and I think people forget that actually it's being paid for
Yes.
and it's paid for everybody. We have a shared responsibility in that sense.
Right.
So I think doing the tax inspector's role, I hate to crib this line, but paying the right amount of tax at the right time, it is important. I think if you pay nothing into a system, you can't expect to take something out.
Has the tax burden steadily increased because of increased pressures upon public spending, the NHS, and the millions of people on benefits? Has it gone too far? Are people having to pay too much tax?
I agree with you there. I think the standard rates of tax in this country are quite high. But when you actually start to compare where the UK is compared to the rest of the Europe, for example, you'll find that our rates aren't too bad. Certainly corporate tax is one of the lowest corporate tax rates in Europe and beyond. But I think at the personal tax level, it's quite high. The top slice now is 45%, Devinder. You've got national insurance, which takes people close to 50% of everything you earn. I do think it's very high. However, that being said, there are things that people can do to look for those efficiencies in the business, and I think that's where tax planning comes into things.
There can be quite a fine line between tax planning and tax evasion and avoidance, which is a very serious and criminal matter. And what advice would you give to people who are thinking of entering into very aggressive schemes?
That I would avoid at all costs, because what we're seeing in my world now is where people have engaged in something, and I don't think it's bespoke planning. I think this is where people have been pretty much sold down the river 5, 10, maybe even 15 years ago.
Because I remember in the press, the film schemes.
Yeah.
There were a lot of film schemes were sold to people, including the stars and celebrities,
Yeah.
and they quickly unravelled.
That's right, yeah. I mean, this is the type of work I was doing at HMRC before I left. And also I see it on this side of the fence, albeit it looks slightly different. You tend to come across more people now who were missold investments, because in their eyes, these things were designed for them to make money. But actually, if you unravel it and look at it in the detail, there's little or no risk to people that have put that money in. And actually, you can see money coming out of the exchequer, which is what HMRC don't like. They don't like people to have taken money out of the system and then eventually get their own investment back. So actually you get nothing for doing nothing. I would say that on this side of the fence, you certainly meet people that have been duped and want to come out of these schemes. They shouldn't feel like they're stuck and having a battle with HMRC for years and years and years. There's always a way out. If they're looking for the light at the end of the tunnel, they should engage a tax specialist to work out what a settlement looks like with HMRC. They could be surprised, and that will help them have a good night's sleep.
There's two things that can't be avoided in life. That's the onward journey to the next life and paying taxes. Are your services really needed? Because people have to pay tax and they just need to get on and pay up. Is that right?
I think in the inheritance tax world, actually, there's more flexibility than people realise. You hear the terms tax avoidance or planning and what HMRC do or don't like, but actually inheritance tax is slightly different. There's a lot that can be done to mitigate or defer that tax. Certainly when you're thinking about leaving a legacy to your children, the next generation, I think Indians are probably one of the worst when it comes to that, because they don't plan for it.
Why is that?
Conversation. I think succession and the second generation talking to the first generation about how they should plan for that is a difficult conversation to have. And I think it comes from the respect that we have for our parents that we tend not to talk about it. But actually, there are perfectly simple, there are perfectly legal, run-of-the-mill planning solutions out there which can actually help parents leave, the largest part of their estate tax-free or completely mitigated.
And are you seeing an increasing number of disputes where an estate has been left without a clear will or without clear planning? Is there more disputes between families?
So unfortunately, we do see that, and that's again the angle that I normally see this at is because there's a legacy tax problem that somebody hasn't dealt with, and after they pass away, that problem is effectively passed on to the next generation. But that next generation actually are trying to work out who should have what. There's a dispute because there might not be a will. Another big problem with the Indian families, the patriarchs and matriarchs of the family, they know what they want to do with their life savings and everything that they built up, but they haven't communicated that in a way that everybody understands.
So planning ahead is very important.
Absolutely.
And is it also true to say that the HMRC often go after smaller people and ordinary people, teachers, doctors, and so on, for taxes, whereas very wealthy people seem to have a privileged life and they don't seem to have the same scrutiny to pay tax?
It's probably fair to say. HMRC have run a number of campaigns over the last decade, some focusing on, for example, teachers or those people doing supply work in the education sector. There have been schemes looking at gas engineers, for example, and dentists. But I think that shows a lazy side of HMRC, because there's a presumption that there are lots of people that are earning money, let's say on a self-employed basis, and not declaring those earnings. It's quite a lazy approach, because they say, come to us and tell us what you've been doing wrong for the last 5 years, 10 years, and we'll go easy on you. There's very little follow-up from HMRC in that regard. But I suppose if they do catch up with someone who should have made a disclosure, it works out to be a lot more expensive for people. I think in the high net worth space, I can see why people think that they get away a little bit easier, but the relationship they have with HMRC is different, and it is privileged, because they have a nicer one-to-one approach with HMRC, and HMRC do that because they don't want to have an argument or a complex dispute with someone.
Yes. And do you have much experience of VAT carousel fraud? Because that seemed to be extremely rife a few years ago, and some of those people have managed to clean up a lot of their illicitly gained millions and millions of pounds and formed large property empires. That does seem unfair to people who have to work hard.
Yeah. So I've never directly been involved in the VAT or indirect tax side, either at HMRC. A little bit on this side of the fence, but not so much at HMRC. But you're right. I think there is a dishonest element to the MTech carousel fraud, and yes, people have profited by going on to having things like property portfolios. However, what I do see, again, which is a big thing for the Indian community, I suppose, and Punjabis, we like property. It's no, it's a well-known thing. We trust bricks and mortar in this country, but people have to be careful, because when you build your portfolios, often from our hard-earned money, there's a tendency for untaxed profits sometimes to creep in there. And when HMRC are looking to see how someone's acquired a big portfolio of this size, they wonder where the money has come from, and that's when people find they have a problem sometimes explaining that.
There's a lot of change at the moment. There's a lot of pressure on government because of social media and press, and we've seen new money laundering regulations in the last 9 months, which are very stringent and place a lot of duties upon solicitors, lawyers, and people involved in tax planning. And what advice are you giving to your clients about money laundering?
The advice is really twofold for the clients as well as professionals like yourself and myself. You're right, the rules have changed considerably. I think we're expected as professionals to ask more questions of a new client. So if someone has designs on performing a particular transaction or doing some business, it's no longer good enough to say, I've got this money and I'm going to use it in such and such way. We have to ask where the source of that money is to ensure that it's not tainted with criminality or tax evasion, because that is a predicate offence for money laundering, for example. I think as we professionals need to do that, and clients need to be prepared to answer those difficult questions, because you can't just take your money anywhere and do business with a professional. That, those difficult questions will be asked.
That's right. And what's your typical client? What sort of clients do you usually help in terms of size of wealth and profession or location?
So I don't have a typical client in terms of their standing. I suppose I help anybody who needs it, and that could be someone typically in business, shop owners, straight to the bigger businesses, international, whether they're corporates or partnerships. But really my clients can be distinguished into two different parts. One is a particular person, he or she might be under inquiry or receive a letter from HMRC, either a more routine looking inquiry or sometimes a more complex investigation into their affairs. And quite often they will speak to their accountants first, financial advisors or lawyers, and end up with a tax specialist like me. And then we help those guys get to the end of those inquiries quicker and more cheaply, I imagine, because we understand HMRC. The other type of client would be those who either know they're sitting on a problem, an old problem, or could be. And for example, at the moment, Indian banks are sending information about people resident in the UK that have got accounts in India. So their balances and the interest they earn every year. This started last year. HMRC received this information from all the banks now, and it's going to happen every single year. And now these people quite often have had accounts for a long, long time. You know, my parents, for example, have enjoyed non-resident Indian accounts because the rates used to be quite high 10, 20 years ago and still have them. The problem is these accounts haven't, the interest hasn't been taxed. And there's a question about where the capitals come from. But now that HMRC have got this information, they are writing it out to everybody. I'm seeing lots of these warning letters go out to Indians, for example, and the letters are quite simple. They will say that we've received information that you have or had something in India, for example. What would you like to tell us about that account? And again, so we help these people volunteer this information to HMRC to get it
And that
fixed.
interest is taxable in the UK, so that interest on accounts in India needs to be declared and tax paid.
Yeah, so to look at it simply, if you've been earning interest in India, let's say for argument's sake, fixed deposits, and you don't bring this money back to the UK, up until 2008, that was okay. Since 2008, people had two choices: either pay tax on the Indian interest, just like anywhere in the world, or there's a complex system known as a remittance basis. So you have to choose one of the two. You can't just ignore that in India. So actually, it's like a little mini time bomb everyone's sitting in.
Because obviously the HMRC can investigate, they can backdate,
Absolutely.
and the penalties can be quite severe, and it can soon run into very large sums.
True. So at this moment in time, we're in a real change period. So for the listeners and viewers, September 2018, those that haven't volunteered this information and corrected it voluntarily, after that period, the penalties are a minimum of 100% of the tax, even if you've made a mistake. So you may have thought about fixing it. You might not have meant to deliberately ignore this issue, but if you can't demonstrate that you had a reasonable excuse, and that's normally something out of your control. Let's say you're hospitalized for a number of years, so you couldn't deal with this. You know, the starting position is that the penalty is 100%, so it's quite stringent.
Perhaps we'll get you back to the Sikh channel to speak about that in more depth, because I think that will be a real issue for many of our viewers with bank accounts and property in India. And in terms of the UK, can you help people with tax planning and efficiency? I think your main part to play really is with IHT and passing on gifts to the family. Is that the biggest area to focus on?
So as a group, I'm part of the Knox group. It's a sophisticated business with a number of focused areas. For example, real estate. There is an accountancy business and a tax planning, if you will, business. And I'm one of the people that are driving the tax disputes and anyone that needs tax help business. So we get involved in all sorts of things. I think people just have to be willing to look at their affairs to work out how they could better structure them and how they could look after the next generation.
That's tremendous. And Amit, just about your work-life balance, how do you manage your family time and your work time?
So, I mean, every week is different. You sometimes find that you're out maybe 2 or 3 evenings as opposed to some weeks where you're not out. But I do think it's very, very important. I think wherever we work, whatever stage of our career that we're at, it's important to be around your children. I've never come across an employer that's not happy for you to manage your own time. I make sure I work at home sometimes because I'm at home in the late afternoon as soon as the kids are there. And in general, I find that I can work anywhere, even if I'm on the move.
Do you feel that we are having to work longer hours within a switched on world and with iPhones and laptops and so on, and emails are non-stop? Are you working much harder than you did maybe 5 or 10 years ago?
I would agree with that, yeah, absolutely. I don't think there's a minute goes past where you're not checking your emails, where you're constantly working. You know, before you even got anywhere near what you would call the office, you've already started. On the weekends, you have a tendency to pick things up as well. So I think we're working all the time. Perhaps a little bit smarter, but we are working more.
And does that affect our well-being and our work-life balance and family time? And in terms of having time for yourself, for example, do you have any hobbies or interests? I'm
not much of a sportsman. I dabbled in a bit of football a few years ago after a number of years. I'm a keen film and cinema goer, so I have a cinema room at home. I make great use of it. My children in turn love to watch their films at home. They like the experience, not necessarily the cinema, because this is something that we could do on the weekend if they want to watch it early in the morning. It's something we do. My wife and the children will also like the outdoors, to the point where you can go out for a walk and find somewhere to eat at the end of that. So it makes for a good, nice day out.
Yes.
We try to do that a few times a month, actually. It's quite important, I think.
That's tremendous. It's very important. And if anybody's thinking of having a career in the HMRC or with tax planning, what advice would you give to them?
I think tax is a hugely interesting area. There is a taboo around tax and the morality of the issue, but I think if you go work at HMRC, you do that in the know that you're actually helping provide the finance for public services. So it's a good place to be. Certainly, I think it helps with your work-life balance. You do have more control. On the private side here, there are so many different specialisms, but to be honest with you, because tax is so complicated, it's actually quite fun as long as you're doing the bits that you like.
Tax is fun. That sounds intriguing, because most people shy away and dread the tax man and completing their tax return each year. But it is an important part of life, something that can't be avoided. And it's one of the reasons why this country is successful and stable and a good place to live. For example, India are struggling with collecting taxes, and one of the reasons why the infrastructure is not so good. What do you think about that?
I think India are changing immensely at the moment, and I think it's going to go through a period of pain for people, because it's actually a lot of change in a small space of time, sorry. But it needs to do it. There's international pressure for India to do these things, and eventually I think the man on the street will begin to see the benefits, but at the beginning it's quite difficult. I mean, I've got a quick story, if I may, on this. I'll keep it very short. It was a few years ago when I think India took the 500 rupees and 1,000 rupee notes out of circulation. So I landed in Mumbai for a business trip, literally a few days after this, and I kind of hadn't worked out what this could mean on the ground. I turned up to Mumbai airport, tried to get money out of the machine so I could pay for a taxi, and the machine was empty because everybody was taking out whatever cash they could. I couldn't book a taxi. They said you can go downstairs and use a different machine. The machine was thrown out. The notes were too big. They were 2,000. That's anything the machine had. And then the taxi guys weren't taking the notes. So that's just one issue. And actually, when you're out and about in Mumbai, I could hear people were complaining because the man on the street doing business for 10, 20, 50 rupees was really struggling. People couldn't pay them. So that's an example of how difficult people on the street were finding it.
Yes.
But Indians are entrepreneurial, because eventually people have these electronic systems that we're used to here now. We can just tap your phones and pay. Even the man on the street was using that. So it happened quite quick.
So change is important, and paying taxes is important. And any other advice you want to give to our viewers about taxation generally, to small business owners?
I think small business owners will do well to ensure that they have trusted bookkeepers and accountants, which I know most people do. I work heavily in the South Asian community with advisors, but the work that I tend to see is if something's gone wrong. I think people should embrace fixing those problems sooner rather than later. It could help in terms of interest and penalties, and really ultimately everybody's looking for a good night's sleep and get to the light at the end of the tunnel sooner. Prevention
is better than cure. And in terms of the banking crisis, was it an unfair burden carried by ordinary people, because the banks had taken us to the brink of disaster and the economy was in trouble? Is it the ordinary public who had to suffer?
I think so. I think some of what we could see as desperate measures by the government to find money, they put the knife in quite hard in certain areas, and that's when people really felt it. And the man on the street would say, well, actually, this is a banking crisis. I think the government should allow some of the banks to fail because it went in and saved them. I'm not an advocate for people in the banking industry to lose their jobs, but I think that the cost of saving everybody has affected everybody else. I think living standards were stretched from about 2008 onwards.
Amit, thank you very much for joining us on Seek Channel. You're a gentleman who enjoys tax and tax investigations and helping people with tax, which is something people usually shy away from. But it's great that you're willing to help people with such a difficult subject.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me.
And we hope to see you again on the Sikh Channel Business Programme. Perhaps you can come back and tell us more about the changes with the Indian bank accounts.
No, my pleasure.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.